Well, hello everybody, and welcome here to our Suspense Outliers video series. I am your host, John Robb, of course, joined by my wonderful co-host, Mr. Doug Lyle. Doug, how you doing?
Just fine, John. It's good to be here, and especially with Jim.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
miss
We
seeing
are
you,
here with
Doug.
none other than #1 New York Times bestselling author, James Rollins, and he is going to be talking today about his book 3 in his Moonfall series called A Dragon of Black Glass. So, James, how you doing today, sir?
Doing fantastic.
Again, we want to thank you so much for coming on. Very excited to kind of talk about the series here. Like we said, this is book 3 of the Moonfall series, and you got to give everybody a little bit about what you got going on with this one, because this is a little more in the fantasy kind of realm that you've kind of went into with this series, which is really cool. So give us a little bit of background into the Moonfall series.
Sure. I got the idea basically from my background of doing research. I've always got my antenna up looking for an idea for a book, and most of it's usually for a Sigma thriller or one of my other standalone thrillers. I'm looking at the weird science or weird history, and I had run across an article in Scientific America about planets that circle their sun with one side always facing the sun and one side facing the darkness, basically called tidally locked planets. Our moon is a tidally locked satellite that circles our Earth with only one side facing us, but there are some planets that do the same. Now, I was just curious about that. Just I thought, gosh, can life actually exist on such a planet of extremes? So I've got my little circle and bevy of scientific friends that are willing to talk to me, surprisingly still. And I said, I posed this to an astrophysicist. I said, hey, can life exist here? And he said, well, yeah, probably. Even though it sounds like it's a planet of extremes, where one side's boiled to a crisp by the sun, and the other side is frigid and cold and eternally dark. But because of thermodynamics, there's going to be a pump that's going to occur where it's going to shift from the cold side to the warm side. There's going to be there's a cycle that's going to occur, and so it's going to be basically a temperate area between those two extremes, basically a band between those that's probably fairly still temperate because of that exchange of extremes. And then I got talking to some xenobiologists and said, hey, in this type of situation, what would life look like? And so that just became my, added it to my idea box. But it sort of sat there. I kept thinking, obviously I can't do a Sigma story like that. But
Right.
early in my career, and which is probably surprising to a few people, not many people have figured this out, is that early in my career, I used to write a fantasy every year and a thriller every year. And so I'd done 7 fantasy novels early in my career, and then sort of stepped away and began doing 2 thrillers a year instead of a fantasy and a thriller every year. But I sort of missed that dynamic of writing 2 very different genres within the cycle of 1 year, because they each pose their own challenges, and their own sort of pros and cons to writing it. They ask me, which do you like writing better, your fantasy or your thriller? And I always tell them it's whatever I'm not writing, I like better, because everything has its own problems that you face, when you're writing a fantasy. Every word, do they call a spoon on this planet, or do they, is it something different? So you have to sort of create this whole, it's all world building. It's, building the history, the religion, the government, how come it arose in that fashion. So you have to build this whole world, which is very complex. But of course, I don't have to figure out where Starbucks is on my fantasy world to make sure that I accurately put the Starbucks in the correct intersection. So that doesn't require as less research. But again, I had this in my idea box, and I began thinking, well, that would be a pretty cool fantasy. If I set a fantasy sort of typical sort of quest type of fantasy, but building into this planet of extremes, what might come from that? And that became the Moonfall series. It starts out with basically a young girl in the swamp. She's orphaned, don't really know much about her past. She gets poisoned by a sort of an apex predator of this world, and because of the venomous intoxication, she has a sort of prophetic vision of the moon crashing into the planet and destroying all life. Which again, I talked to some astrophysicists. If Earth stopped spinning and went to a tidally locked situation, what would happen to the moon? And they said, well, basically one of two things: it'll slowly either drift out of our orbit, or it'll crash into the planet. So of course, me being the thriller writer, I'm thinking it's going to crash into the planet.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
back once upon a time, this planet used to spin, and now it doesn't. And now the moon is about to crash into the planet. Now it's up to, in a medieval level of technology, how do you stop the moon from crashing into your planet? And that becomes a big, quest. Is her prophetic dream real? Is she crazy? And if so, if this really is a threat, how do we stop it? And so that becomes a big quest throughout the 4-volume series. So book 3, A Dragon of Black Glass, is number 3. It's the penultimate novel in the series. There's one more to go that completes the cycle.
Did you know that there were going to be 4 books in this when you started the first one?
I did. It was fairly structured, and again, I'm not a great outliner. I know the big beats of my stories, but I don't know the fine details. I'll know where the beginning is. I know where it ends. I'll know a few tent poles that are going to hold up the story, but I don't necessarily know how A connects to B connects to C. To me, if I know that too well, I get bored with the story. I like to have a little bit of that terror involved between those tent poles. So when we're structuring, again, even though it's a 4-book volume and each book sort of has a stopping point, there's a major climax that occurs in each volume, but ultimately the 4 volumes tell one big story. And so I do know, where the story is going to end. I do know what the solution is. I got to get there. So the first book is sort of setting up the whole world, setting up the challenge, setting up the quest team, setting up the obstacles they're going to face. Book 2, basically, they have to travel to to the frozen side of the world. Book 3, which is the one Dragon of Black Glass, they head out into the sun blasted area of the planet. Each of them have goals they have to accomplish in those areas, and then book 4 is the culmination of the novel, where they either face defeat or victory.
Nice.
I love it. I love it.
Now, of course, the setting is, I mean, is the series, but then you had to put characters. And so you had to start thinking about how you were going to create characters to fit into this world. And like you said, they had to be a little bit different than Earth, many different challenges. So when you were thinking of character creation, what kind of, personality traits or things did you really want to have with your characters as they interacted each other, along with the environmental things that they have to incur?
I like to, when it comes to these characters, I like to make them as complex as I can,
Mhm.
and as real as I can. I'm not going to ruin anything, because it's a poorly kept secret that this planet is Earth. So there's not really a big, Planet of the Apes moment where you go, aha, at the end, oh, this is Earth, because basically they call it Earth. They spell it with a U, it's URTH. So it's a poorly kept secret that this is our planet. So I'm allowed to have humanoids, human people that are there. But also I like, populating it with a bunch of different, talking to xenobiologists, what type of life, how would life mutate in that planet? If you took the current species of the planet, you stop the planet from spinning, how are they going to fill its environmental niches? So that plays a big role. The technology was quite advanced when the planet stopped spinning. And so there are actually some automatons, some artificial intelligent creations on this planet they have to deal with too. But the characters themselves, again, putting a quest team together, you want a whole bunch of different variables, a whole bunch of different threats. Who can be trusted in this group, who can't be. I love playing in that gray area between those extremes. Nobody's particularly ultimately good. Nobody's particularly ultimately bad. Even the bad guys, they have a reason what they're doing. They think she's crazy. They think what she's going to do is going to damage the planet, and so they're trying to stop her for very good reasons, because they just don't believe her. So I like playing with that dynamic where nobody is necessarily the chosen one or the perfect person that's going to solve the problem. Even the main character, the swamp girl that has this vision, it is sort of an ensemble cast. She's important, but she's not necessarily the most critical character to the whole story.
Gotcha. Cool.
Fascinating. I mean, I love the research and the
Yeah.
questions that you have to ask for something like this. I used to read a whole lot of sci-fi, and I was always fascinated how Heinlein and Asimov and all those guys came up with all these ideas and concepts, and then made them believable.
Yeah.
And that was the key. So I admire that kind of work. It's world building is not easy.
Yeah. So what I did, I had a conceit when I started this novel. I wanted to make it feel like you were reading almost like a naturalist journal of these events. So it's interspersed throughout the novel there. I found a wonderful graphic artist who does these almost like anatomical, naturalistic sketches of the creatures that appear in the book. So there's like about a dozen different pictures of the creatures. So I want to make it feel like at that level of authenticity, like, oh my gosh, this is like, there's a scientific article in here about these creatures in the middle of this book. So again, try to make it feel like this isn't so much a fantastical world as it's sort of grounded in reality.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And and like you said, you're still doing 2 books a year because you had the 18 Sigma Force book, come out not too long ago. Congratulations on that. I mean, that series is fantastic. And that was what Archangel that just came out. So the mentality of having to write 2 different kind of, vastly little bit different series. What are the challenges for you as an author to just keep shit straight?
Well, once upon a time early on, what I call the prequel to the Sigma universe, Sandstorm, I tried writing that concurrently with a fantasy, where I do
Right.
like one, a couple chapters in the fantasy, then do switch over into a couple chapters in the thriller, and it's almost like stripping gears in your head. Is that the style is very different. So I found out I got to do just a fantasy, and then I got to do just a thriller. I've got to immerse myself in each of those worlds. Otherwise, it's just, it's just too hard to try flipping between those two. But in regards to why I liked it, why I returned to this was that early on, I liked being able to stop that staccato paced thriller that, the gun-toting, super team that's out there like Sigma or my standalones, and then switching to something that's a little bit world building, a little bit richer in prose. You're allowed to be a little bit slower in your storytelling because that's what fantasy readers will accept. That they know they need to learn about this world, they need to be immersed in this world, so they accept stories that are maybe a little bit slower initially so they can get involved in that world. So they're very, very different skill sets, and I like sort of switching between those. So again, when I'm done with that sort of staccato paced thriller, then I'm ready to delve into something deeper. When I'm done with that rich fantasy world, I'm ready to go back to that staccato paced thriller.
I mean,
I find that fascinating. I have 2 series, and one of them is kind of a dark thing, and the other's comedic. And that's what I do is I go back and forth between the two. But do you find that when you're working on one, the other one's saying, "Hey, I got an idea." Oh, wait, I got another idea.
That is a big danger because typically when I'm writing a novel, I'm already researching something else. So I'm
Exactly.
used to the fact that there's always something else sort of boiling in the background. And so I just have to jot those notes down or put them away because if I just think I'll remember that, I won't, A,
Yeah,
and
right.
B, it'll be stuck in my head that's hard to concentrate because I'll keep dwelling on that. So until I
Right.
actually write it down and sort of shove it aside, it sort of stays in your head.
Yep.
Yeah. What's kind of, when you start seeing some of the younger authors and the storytelling that's coming out today, what's something, if a younger author were to come up to you and say, James, what's one piece of advice you can kind of give me? What would you kind of say to them, seeing as how your career has just blossomed into, fantastic, what's something that you would tell them to give them that kind of motivation to keep moving on?
I think that's the key is to keep moving on. I taught writing. I've done writers workshops where I've had like a group of authors, trying to get published, and a lot of times they have a tendency to keep reworking those first 3 chapters, thinking until they get those first 3 chapters perfect, they're just can't move on, and that's a trap.
Yes.
You have to just get your novel done because you're not going to know what needs to be changed in those first 3 chapters until you've written the last 3 chapters. It's only then you're going to see the stories in entirety. So then you can probably properly edit it, properly trim down what's extraneous, and try to get it down to the core part of your story. So that's number one. And the other thing that's a sort of a caveat to that same sentiment is that, on my computer right here, I have a little sticker that says, "Today I give myself permission to write crap."
Yep.
I tell everybody that.
Is
I
that
tell everybody that.
it's unless you can get that internal editor out of your head, a lot of times I will tell people during my writing day, I'll write, it takes me about an hour to write a page, sometimes a little quicker, sometimes a little slower. But typically, every time I put a sentence on a page, it never ends up in the book. Is that it gets edited, deleted, changed, switched to a different paragraph. It's never where I put it initially. So if you try to dwell on that to an extreme, like, oh, I've got to make this perfect, you'll never finish that story. Just write it all out. Even if there's sections like, I'm not even sure what's going to happen here, just write something, keep moving on. Otherwise, you won't get that book done.
I tell students that all the time. And one of the reasons is you're going to spend all that time cleaning up those first, 40 pages, but you don't even know your characters yet. So how do you know what they're going to do, say, think, react? You don't know yet. So finish the story and then go back and do all that stuff. You're spinning your wheels in the mud. Tell the story.
When I wrote Subterranean, my first novel, I called it a diamond in the rough. Apparently, many editors thought it was very rough, to the point where I got those typical rejection letters. Dear sir, ma'am, we hate your book. Don't send it to us again.
Right.
Editor sent me, a personal little note on the side. Hey, Jim, we like this one character. Too bad the rest of your novel sucks. But you can survive a little while on that little bit of that little encouragement. But one of the editors I still have his note. I still know who he is. I still see him occasionally. Sent me, again, the form rejection letter, but he basically wrote me a personal note on the back. 3 words: this is unpublishable. So, wonderful words of encouragement.
Yes, thank you very much.
So again, why I'm bringing that up is that when actually, an agent first of all said, hey, this is diamond in the rough, I think we can do something with this. And an editor, Lissa Cusho, over at Avon, now was HarperCollins, eventually Morrow. She said, well, Jim, Subterranean, basically, for those that don't know what the story is basically I take 5 or 6 characters, I throw them 2 miles underneath the earth, then I throw in some monsters and I shake. And she said, you got to put those characters down that hole by page 50. Now, my original draft, they weren't down that hole until page 150. So you got to cut out of the first 100 pages of your novel. Now, of course, I'm thinking every word I've written is essential. So I kept, trimming it down. Look, Lisa, I got them down the hole and by page 100. No, by page 50. Trim, trim, trim. Look, they're in the hole by page 75. Nope, by 50. Then change font, change margins. Trying to cheat a little bit. But eventually, I realized so much extraneous stuff that's there. And again, I couldn't see it, even though I finished the novel. It took an editor and agent sort of to work with me on that. But that's why I said it's caveat to just finish your story, because I didn't know that the characters had to be down that hole by page 50. Just until you write the whole thing out, you don't really realize, gosh, she's right. I don't really need those first 100 pages. They're just basically spinning my wheels. But again, until you finish it, you're not going to know that.
Well, essentially, the first novel that I ever read as a kid, like I'd call an adult novel, after you do the YA stuff, the guy wins a football game and gets the girl, that kind of bullshit stuff, was Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is basically what you're talking about here. Yeah. And I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, which I didn't realize is the International Spelunkers headquarters is there, because there's 2 counties there that have more explorable caves than anywhere in the world because of the limestone. You're a spelunker. You still doing that?
I haven't done it in a while, but I still go to the grotto meetings, the club meetings, just to touch bases. I stopped for a while because I thought I was just too old, too creaky, and my midline was getting a little bit wider, which was tunnels. If your belly's sticking out, it's hard to do that. And so I stopped for a bit, thinking I was too old. But then I went to one of the grotto meetings, and there was a gentleman, giving a talk about the last cave we did. Is has drawings and very technical and how we did it and how we approached. It was a very vertical case, so a lot of rope work, and this guy was 65 when he went in that thing. So now I'm thinking at that point, I think I was like 52 or something. I thought, oh, here's 65. You're doing the challenging. So I made a commitment myself to get in shape. Which being such a lazy ass and get back into shape. And so I have done some caving since then, but I think the last time I've actually caving was about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Nice.
Pretty scary stuff, actually. But yeah.
So jamesrollins.com is your website and your portal for everything. I mean, your website is very detailed and it's great for fans. Now, which social media site are you on the most for fans to kind of maybe interact with you, maybe get a signed copy of your book? Are you doing any kind of book tours? that you know of yet for this book?
I'll be on tour. I'll be in on the oh gosh, can remember the dates. It's the Monday before the release. I'll be over at the Poison Pen.
Oh yeah.
Talk and signing copies there. I don't know what's going after that, but I know that's already set. In regards to reaching me, social media is great. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter /X, whatever you call it nowadays. Those are probably the best places to reach me. Also, if you go to my website, there's an Ask Jim button. So I usually spend about half an hour every day just replying to people's emails. I was shocked that it's just me replying. Sometimes they're like, I hated this book because of this reason. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. But no, I mean, it's just me. So if you hit that Ask Jim button, that question's coming to me directly.
And of course, you have a newsletter sign up. And how often do fans maybe get a newsletter from you? Is it something that you're doing once a month, a little bit less or more?
I don't want to bombard people. I know I get a little bit upset when people, constantly just hit me. So generally, I will release a newsletter about a month before a book comes out, just to give a heads up, and then another newsletter the day of the launch of the book.
Cool.
And being that I do 2 books a year, you're going to get 4 newsletters from me.
Nice.
Good idea.
Well, James, we want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been a while since we spoke, so it's great to kind of catch up and see how you're doing. Love the new series here. Again, everybody, the latest book is book 3 in the Moonfall series called A Dragon of Black Glass. And real quick before you let you go, I know you're working on 4. Is that going to come out in 26? Do you know, or do you not have a time frame for that one yet?
Right now, it looks like it should be out 2026. Again, it just depends on. I'm still working on it, so I think I'll make my deadline on that still. So I think we're fine.
Nice.
It depends on the vagaries of the publishing world and what week looks best, and when they can find the best slot for it. So
right,
maybe for 2026, yeah.
And those decisions are all above your pay grade.
Exactly.
So there's that.
Well, again, James, we want to thank you so much for coming on, talk a little bit about the book and the series. Wish you nothing but the best, and we will see you later on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, and bye-bye.
Good to see you, Jim.